When it comes to entertainment in the media, video games are one of the biggest choices out there. It's also very easy to get into since there are always free games to play, be it on your computer or on your mobile phone. One of these has time and efforts put into them most of the time, and the other one is mostly dopamine hits over and over until you run out of energy, where you can either wait for it to be refilled or you can just... But no matter the video game, if the game doesn't have some sort of balancing in it, then chaos is going to ensue from the community. Balancing is a difficult thing to do when it comes to video games because video game development is hell itself. You need knowledge in coding your game, otherwise it will not work at all. You need people to design what your game is looking like, otherwise you'll just have a pile of code, which actually what were some games back then? Examples such as the Dreamhold where there weren't any visuals at all, just text on a screen. You will also need someone to do the sound effect and the music for your games, otherwise it's going to be like... So there's a lot of things that go into the development, and when the devs finally feel like everything is done, they release the game and find out their community is just using one of the 500 items you have in the game, because that one singular item can one-tap every enemy they come across. Now in a single player game that doesn't sound like a big of a deal, and that's because it isn't. But when that gets switched over to online gaming, then it's a massive issue because it causes a balancing issue. So why am I talking about game balancing? Well, it's in the title of the video. I'm going to be talking about the popular asymmetrical horror survival game Dead by Daylight and how the game is in a way balanced despite being a complete mess.
He said it! He said it!
Now I have a good amount of time in DBD, which is why I'm going to explain why the game has completely balanced being completely awful. Starting with talking the survivor side of the game, then the killer side of the game, and then where the game is now. Now I am going to straight up splash you with the cold water and tell you that I am a killer main. No, stop, put the pitchforks down and hear me out. I joined DBD during the Curtain Call chapter, which was released on the 12th of June 2018, and from what I've seen and heard, DBD was insanely survivor-sided. Now stop punching your monitor and screaming at me that you're wrong! You need to hear why I say that to begin with. Keep in note this is all before chapter 8. To start off, DBD was very different back then, and it's crazy to see how it survived during that time. To start, we got the maps themselves. Now, these maps still exist in present DBD, but one giant different. They are mostly fair now. Mostly. You see, back then there was a thing that caused nothing but pain and misery to every killer no matter which one you were playing as. That being infinite loops. Now what are infinite loops? Well, it literally says it on the tin, Heinz Bean. I mean, a loop that goes on infinitely, meaning that even with Bloodlust Tier 3, the killer is not catching you. I think you can see why this is a problem now. But if you are truly covering your eyes and calling infinite loops fake and untrue, let me show you.
Yes. Oh, hello. I used them. Oh, you're at the infinite, are you? I'm blocking you, I'm blocking you. So... Did you get stuck?
Do you see now? Now, despite being a role where you have to survive, surely you must understand that eventually you are meant to lose a chase, from either being outplayed or having no resources to keep going. But with infinite loops, you can literally just run around in a circle in a singular spot forever and never get caught. Also, if you would like to know more about infinite loops and other survivor-sided things, after watching this video of course, I have linked a bunch of videos by a YouTuber called Arditha in the description of this video that goes over some crazy perks and survivor with friends fully squads in general. Another thing that caused pain and suffering was something called vacuum pallets. But what do I mean when I say vacuum pallets? Well, basically back then, when running towards a pallet, you could press the action button to drop it. Now that sounds normal, and that's actually what happens now. If you run into a pallet and press the button, the game will wait until you're on the other side of the pallet and then drop it. But that's now. Back then, for some ungodly reason, if you ran out of pallet and pressed the action button, you would instantly teleport to the other side and drop the pallet, making you completely invulnerable to any attack, except for the Huntress's hatchets. But out of the 11 killers that were in the game before the Curtain Call chapter, only 9% of the killer roster could counter vacuum pellets. Do you see why that's a problem? The third issue were the items the survivors could bring into the trial with them. In DBD, as a survivor, if you have them, you can bring an item in with you to the trial, be it a flashlight, medkit, or toolbox. Now this makes sense since killers can't switch powers, at least back then. But the issue was that the devs didn't know how to fucking balance them. Now old survivor mains are once again telling me to shut the fuck up and stop being an entitled snob, to which I say,
is this you?
but it wasn't the items themselves that was the issue. Kind of. It was the add-ons that you could use with them. The most damning example of this was Old Brand New Part, which let you instantly complete an entire generator from a single button press. To put this into perspective, a singular generator takes 90 seconds nowadays, but it used to be 80 seconds. So imagine a full team of 4 survivors who are friends and on Skype or TeamSpeak with each other, loading into a match all with brand new parts. There's your issue. Another common thing that survivors would bring in with them is insta-heals, which does as it says, it instantly heals you, be it for 1 health state or the stupid one which healed 2 health states, letting you pick up a recently downed survivor as the killer was doing their cleaning animation. And the most stupid of the 3 was insta-blinds. Now I think you can tell what it does, but for those who are too busy watching Family Guy on TikTok, yes I know you are doing that, stop it. Insta-blinds instantly blind you. Instead of taking a few seconds, you can just quickly click it at their face and boom.
Did somebody say boom?
The killer has had his seeing privileges revoked. Now this can be done anytime during the entire trial, be it in a small chase, at a pallet, or even when picking up a survivor, which was the most common time to do it, since the killer can do jack shit against it. Looking at a wall? Well, the second you turn around, you have already been blinded. By the time it took for your brain to register that the survivor is shining a light at your face, you are already blind. And finally is the perks. Now the topic about what perks are balanced and underpowered is a bit dicey, so I'm gonna quickly cover it. But in short, back then every survivor always ran the same 4 perks. Those perks being Dead Hard, which was essentially a press to win button, Decisive Strike, which was another press to win button, Borrowed Time, which made both the rescuer and the rescuee invincible, and finally, Unbreakable, which let you just stand back up after a short time, which basically took another stab at the killer trying their best. And if they didn't run Unbreakable, they were running Self-Care, which let you heal yourself completely with nearly no downsides. Now, if this all happened in one match, understandably you will be a bit upset with the match afterwards. But no problem, because you were going into a new one that's going to be different. Right? Well, around this time, Bully Squads was one of the most popular groups of survivors around the game. Though the second most popular was usually just people who didn't know what they were doing. Generators? What are those? So you repeat that match over, and over, and over, until you eventually say, fuck this, and proceed to beat the shit out of your PC. But it wouldn't exactly be fair of me to talk about just the survivor side and state nothing wrong with the killer side. So let's do that, shall we? So I asked popular Dead by Daylight YouTuber Benjo when in the game's life was it considered killer-sided, and here's what he said.
That way. Yeah, old DBD would have been domination. Like, if we all had the skills we did now in DBD and went back to the old version of the game, survivors would dominate. But back when people didn't really know about looping, or for the most part, most people didn't know about looping, I think killers had much more of an advantage at that time.
In my opinion, the game has never been killer-sided. Now, I know that doesn't sound fair. Sure, there were times where the killer was a bit stronger than usual, but the game has never truly been so killer-sided that it felt like you always lose as a survivor. But that doesn't stop the game from having stupid moments where the killer was a bit too strong. So for this section, I will go over those times, and save the big one for the end of this section. To start, we had Old Legion. Now Legion nowadays isn't really that strong, it's just a group of teenagers whose power is to go from a jog to a sprint. But when Legion originally came out, that was still their power, but crazy stupid. First off, they could swing non-stop in their power with 0 cooldown. This chapter added the deep wound status effect as well, and that itself is rather annoying. They also used to be able to reduce your deep wounds bar by stabbing you for a second time while in their sprint. But the worst feature by far was the fact that the Deep Wound bar would start draining if you exited the chase. Now it doesn't sound that bad, but trust me, it was. There was a tech that the Legion could do that would 100% guarantee a down without any counter from survivors. First, you'd spot a survivor, enter your power and stab them. Then you just follow their scratch marks while staring at the floor. This means that the survivor technically isn't in a chase, which causes the Deep Wound bar to go down and then down the survivor themselves. You can still do this as Pig, by the way. Even a blind person can see why that's a problem. You don't even do anything to earn the down. You just stab the fucker and then moonwalk after them until they die! Thankfully, Deep Wounds and Legion themselves are in a much better spot now and you can actually go against them. Another point of the killer being a gamble to play against was when the game was P2P. Now you're probably thinking I'm talking about pay to play, which sounds broken, but what I'm actually talking about is peer to peer. That's right, until the summer of 2019, Dead by Daylight was peer to peer. Now if you ever played GTA Online, then you know just how much of an issue peer-to-peer is. I'm not talking about DDoSing and all that, I'm mainly talking about the fact that you can be from the land of the free and unpaid medical bills as a survivor, and the killer could be from the most rundown city in Zimbabwe that has an internet connection somehow. So for you, the game is running fine, but for the killer, it's running like a PowerPoint slideshow, meaning they get hits that don't make sense to you, and stuns that you are 1000% sure happened get ignored. Spirit is a killer. So the nurses... No, I'm joking. Spirit is a killer that on release was pretty strong. Now Spirit is still definitely a bit strong nowadays, but nowhere near as strong as her release because of a few changes. First off, her phasing sound, which wasn't directional, meaning you won't have any idea where she's coming from. She could be behind you. She also had a certain add-on that made her stupid strong, prayer beads. What they used to do was, it would delete your phasing sound if the survivor were in your terror radius. Now what's the issue? You are in her terror radius, so you can just start running, right? Well, what happens if you get to a pallet standoff and she stands still? Well, let's play a little game, shall we?
Is she
phasing? You have 5 seconds to guess if the spirit is phasing. Okay, time's up. Let's see your answer. Wrong! They were standing still, and now you've been grabbed from the pallet. Try harder and do better next time. Nurse. Oh boy, where to start. Nurse has always been a controversial killer through the entire game. Nothing can be done to save her. She is always too strong no matter what behavior does to her. Now let me point this out because I feel like people don't understand this. It is okay to have a strong character and perks in a game. As long as it has some sort of counterplay, then it's okay. Nurse's counterplay is not a lot. The only real ones I can think of is staying out of her line of sight so it's harder to blink to you, avoiding windows since it's practically a free hit, and stunning them perfectly. Or you can just, But other than that, Nurse is the hardest challenge for behavior to fix. If they just remove her, then people who play her 24/7 or just like her will be deafening. But if they ignore her, then they will always get complaints about how she needs a nerf. She is quite literally an impossible character to balance because it's a lose-lose no matter what you do. They did make it so she has to get tokens now before she can blink, but even then it didn't change much. She also had a challenging add-on that made it so you couldn't blink through walls with it. Now admittedly this doesn't change much because you can still just appear behind you, but it's still a little challenge as blinks you could do before are now gone. But enough whining about the past, let's have a quick little look at the good the game has done in modern times, shall we? I've ranted about how shit this game was for a decent while now, and I'm kind of tired of doing that. So instead, let me tell you some good things that got added/changed in the current year. And what better way to start than to say all the things the killer side has been enjoying. Starting with Borrow Time, Decisive Strike, and Dead Hard being nerfed into the fucking core of the planet. These picks were the most annoying to go against because they would always, without fail, be in every single match. Finally, telling the sweaty survivor mains to try playing with other perks for a change is a godsend. Once again, link in the description for in-depth views of those survivor perks. The second good thing that happened, which is a mixed bag of goods for both sides, is that the maps have been mostly entirely changed. Now, there are still maps that are sighted towards one side of the player base, but they have been changed in a way that makes them more fair to play. The biggest example I can give of this is Haddonfield. Haddonfield was one of the worst maps to ever play on as a killer because of one reason. It was too fucking big. For the time it took you to go from one edge of the map to the other, a gen or two is done. And the worst part is that all the loops are inside and essentially infinite loops. Speaking of infinite loops, almost all of them have been removed. There are still a few, such as the main building on Dead Dog Saloon, and bad RNG for Mother's Dwelling, but other than that, the game is a bit more fair. Now for you survivors, Killer's got some nerfs as well. First off, a bunch of Killer add-ons were changed to be more fair for survivors, like prayer beads being nerfed so now you can hear the phasing no matter what. 5 blink nurse, yes I am not kidding, she used to have an add-on combination that let her have 5 blinks, as if the nurse wasn't strong enough. Exhaustion add-ons also got nerfed, which was stupid strong because it countered the infamous E perk. And Legion now actually needing to play the game instead of just stabbing you once while in their power and then moonwalking after you. Hillbilly got a nerf which makes it that the chainsaw can now overheat, which is kind of strange. I don't think he needed that. Basically, if he does a chainsaw sprint for too long, then his chainsaw goes too hot for him to handle and he must let it cool down before it explodes in his hands. Pig got nerfed too. Shocking, I know. Can't really think of much else for you survivors though. Sorry. But let's wrap things up. Dead by Daylight is a hot mess when it comes to balancing, but the devs are trying their best to balance the game so it's fair for both sides to play, because if one side of the game goes, the whole game dies. If there's no killers, how will survivors get matches? If there's no survivors, how will the killer get matches? I asked DVD content creator Benjo again what he thought on the current balance of the game, and here's what he had to say.
I'm honestly happy with it. DBD is an asymmetrical 4v1 horror game whereby maps, loadouts and killers are random for the most part. You never know what you're going to get, so you can't really balance it, and you shouldn't strive to balance it, or at least not to an extreme point where every match feels the same. The wackiness of how overpowered certain situations are for both survivor and killer is what keeps the game fresh. In terms of which side it favours, the answer is still whoever is tryharding the most. And if I'm forced to choose, in most public lobbies, I think it's probably easier for killer to play in such a way to try and force a win.
I personally agree with Benjo on some statements, like the wackiness of how OP certain situations are for both survivors and killers is what keeps the game fresh, and how you never know what you are in for until the match starts. I personally think the game isn't favoured for any side at this current point in time, but there are some questionable changes, like why did Hillbilly need the nerf? Or why did Skull Merchant need to exist? But that's just all one idiot's take on the whole balancing of a game he plays. I know I didn't talk about boons or hex totems, but that's because I simply do not give a shit about them. They are a perk you can activate in a trial and then get deactivated by the opposite roll. Also, if you saw my 500 subs celebration vid, thank you by the way, I said I was going to have a shorter outro, so here. Big thanks to a Wild Tea Addict for the artwork and for providing the You Are Wrong voice clip, and for contributing to the Is She Phasing skit. Big thanks to Benjo for allowing me to poke and prod him about the game, and for letting me set up a mini event in his server to make the previously mentioned skit. Thanks to Teethling for accepting my commission to make this new profile pic for me. Thanks to this anonymous user who wants to remain anonymous for this image of Sam. And finally, thanks to Raffred Wolf and Janine for submitting your voices for the Is She Phasing skit as well. I'm Sam, and thank you for watching.